Pray.
So, come on.
Holy God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this fall season. We thank you for this technology that allows us to be connected even in times of physical distancing. I thank you for all who are on this study, everyone's lives who are represented here, and the importance of this time that we learn and grow and make differences in our society. Guide us in our discussion, that it will all be to your glory and to the uplifting of your creation. In Christ's name, amen.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I love to see your faces on these little tiny screens up there. And I'm going to start with a comment. I had no idea of everything I read here. I had no idea. But we are so imperialistic. When I never would have put that word with America. And then, all these times we were in other countries, I'm thinking, we're helping them. No, we weren't. We were helping ourselves. So that was kind of hard to read for me today. So I think I'm going to ask my first question. Why do you think Teddy Roosevelt, toward the beginning of the chapter, why do you think he thought that the United States needed a war in 1897? Why do you think anybody would need a war?
To help the economy, our economy.
Right? Anything else?
Probably had election coming on.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's also a note about deflecting rebellious energy that went into strike and protest movements. But then, in terms of economic reasons, it's, help the economy kind of sounds positive, but ultimately it kind of goes back to capitalism, which is, overproduction, which, like, if you think about it, that's still something that we're stuck with today. It's as the opposite of like fair distribution. It's like, because there's this connection of warmongering and capitalism again, where we need to produce more in order to create more profit. And therefore, we will always be entangled in, the expansion of markets.
Yeah, I think also because whether you agree with the wars or not, wars tend to unite people. If there's a lot of unrest in the country, when you go to war, there tends to be somewhat of a united front.
Unfortunately, yeah. Mother talked about that from World War II. She was always telling me stories from World War II. Excuse me. And that was the big thing. She talked about how everybody was united and had the same goal. And
Betsy?
And a lot of times, I guess we're protecting our interests, our investments in other countries, or we want to sell them our product. We want to, we are producing so much and more than we need as a country, so we needed a place to export it and sell it to. So that's part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still the money.
It's all the money.
Still the money. Katya?
Oh, I already said what I wanted. Sorry, I forgot to unraise my hand.
Okay. I lowered your hand. Ted?
There's also an element, it had changed somewhat after the Civil War, but for over 100 years, we've been sticking our nose into Central America. The term in the 1850s was filibustering, where we had people going down there actually trying to conquer parts of these countries to incorporate for agricultural purposes into the slave aristocracy. But the Latin America in general had achieved independence, and Cuba was one of the few Spanish possessions left that gave us the excuse to go after liberation and grab some land while we were at it.
Land is a lot of the cause of wars, grabbing land.
Oh. Okay, what do you guys think? Because now you know, we're talking about expansion overseas. They had to go get markets because of what you guys have just said. What do you think now that we've shipped over manufacturing jobs, you know, to so many different countries? Who has a comment about that?
What was the question about?
The shipping over of manufacturing jobs to, you know, like Vietnam and countries where they can pay them much less wages, Pakistan, China. What do you guys think about that?
You just answered your own question. It's about the money again.
Oh, it's about the money.
Well,
Okay, let me rephrase it. What is the human cost of doing that?
Oh,
Well,
Oppression.
it's more oppression.
It's terrible oppression. And I go back to that. What's that guy's name? I forgot. Michael. He made the movies.
More.
Oh, Moore?
Moore.
Michael Moore? Yeah.
He made one about Walmart. And I was trying to, I was the union rep for the fine arts people, and I was trying to get them to see some of these. And I was appreciated deeply and hated deeply for doing that. But this one that I saw in I forgot what country it was in, bless their hearts. And the guy from Walmart, they were making $0.25 a day or something, making stuff, garbage for Walmart. And he bought them all lunch one day. He got fired.
Wow.
He got fired for doing that.
One of the many reasons I refuse to even step foot in a Walmart anymore. I haven't shopped at Walmart in a long time because of their corrupt practices. It's certainly not a Sam Walton Walmart anymore, for sure.
No,
Ted.
my husband doesn't want me to shop there. He calls it. He was always in the wholesale grocery industry, and he said, "Don't shop at the evil empire."
Ted.
well, we have another factor that's beginning to enter into this. It's a combination of the petroleum cost of these great big ships shipping the stuff over, and the fact of the delay of the time that they're at sea. So this is one reason we're seeing, particularly in the state of Chihuahua, but businesses coming back to a certain extent, United States, particularly Mexico, because of the faster turnaround time for the delivery and the lack of shipping. Like when we were on that supposedly cruise boat in January, its mileage, it got 56 feet per gallon of gas.
Ooh,
Feet.
56 feet
I thought it
per
was
gallon.
67. Anyway,
That gives you a
a
picture
ridiculously low.
that the overall cost, even though they take tons and tons of cargo, still we're having a loss on that, considering that eventually production will decline. Coupled with the amount of time they're at sea and the changes that can take place in between the production and the actual consumption, that you have a faster turnaround by having the business in the United States or Mexico or Canada.
Katya.
Well, it's what we're reading about in terms of working conditions in the late 19th century. Ultimately, everything has been transferred abroad, and it's all about money. You know, it's like we used to have sweatshops, you know, then some regulations were passed. We don't anymore, even though you can argue that, you know, some of the immigrants who work illegally here, they probably work in the conditions that are very similar. It just got transferred abroad, and then there's no patriotism in that. There are no national interests, and the money doesn't care about the national interest, even though they've learned to manipulate the language very skillfully. But you know, we all know that all of those big corporations that produce everything abroad, you know, they don't pay not only a fair share of taxes, but pretty much no taxes at all, and they're exploiting people no differently than they were exploiting people here in the state in the 19th century.
I wonder how much the regulations have to do with that. Is regulating labor laws here? They just ship them the job somewhere else. They don't have those restrictions with the labor laws overseas. Ryan.
You'd asked about the human cost, and certainly the people who are being paid less than a living wage are paying a significant cost. But there's a complementary cost for the beneficiaries of those cheap wages, which is us. We are bound complementarily, right? We have to do the emotional labor of justifying that sort of activity. We have to do the work of remaining ignorant about what's happening. And we have to, the story about the manager buying lunch for all the employees getting fired, if we don't conform to the oppressive regime's image of how everyone ought to behave, then we pay a price in that way as well. You know, we're not directly involved with them, but we have to stay in our place, as it were, so that the empire can continue doing its work.
Nasty word.
Lori Ryder wrote in the chat, NAFTA had a lot of unintended consequences in South America. Do you want to say a little more about that?
Oh, hold on. Oh, I thought I was muted.
Nope.
So, well, it just, it caused, so our big corporations wound up going in there and made poor people even poorer. You know, I'm thinking of farmers, and it caused small businesses to go out. It just caused a lot more poverty. I mean, maybe it was, but I don't think Clinton intended for that to happen. Or maybe he did. Maybe it was a big compromise.
I think when we go meddling in other countries' business, we end up not understanding the culture that we're interfering with. And we see that in the Middle East quite prevalent. And it causes more trouble than it solves, because we don't understand what we're stepping into.
Well, even if there were some good intentions there, runaway capitalism wrecked it.
Right.
Okay.
Ted?
Well, the other side of this one is some of the automotive firms that are in Mexico, like our current Volkswagen Golf was made in Puebla, and they've been making Volkswagens there for generations. And they don't pay U.S. wages, but for Mexico, they pay a very respectable wage. Or like in Ciudad, Chihuahua, the Ford engine plant where most of the truck engines are produced is over a mile long out at the north end of town. I've seen it. And this is a major source of employment for the city of Chihuahua. So it is a mixed bag. Or like along Santa Teresa on the border, we have a computer firm that some of the components are coming from the United States. It's a 2-mile trip to haul it into Mexico. They produce the computer 2 miles to come back to the States. And the whole community down there, both Metropolitan Juarez and Santa Teresa, are booming in part because of this.
Yeah. But then Trump came in and told the car companies not to go elsewhere.
Well, they already had.
Well, right.
Fact is, we had one Volkswagen that was built in Brazil.
However, yeah, Katie's asking, do they permit union?
So what would you talk about what you just posted? About
Katya?
unionization?
Oh, are you talking to me? Well, it's a rhetorical question. I mean, I don't know. I'm not arguing against that. You're right. I mean, maybe the wages are fair, but again, like I don't know, are they fair enough? Because are they making the same amount of money that would be made by a worker in the United States? And if they're not, it is still a certain form of, taking advantage of the conditions. And then my other question is like, so in Germany and in some other countries, workers get to sit. Well, first of all, unionization is, I don't remember the percentage, but the rate is like 80% or something like that. And workers actually sit on the boards of companies where they are allowed to make decisions about the companies, and they're allowed to make decisions on the policies, and the percentage of workers is like close to 50%, something like this. So again, it's a complex question, and I don't know. It's a rhetorical question.
May I ask you, did you just say Germany? What did you just say about Germany? Katya.
Oh, yes, Germany.
You gotta do more than that. You gotta.
Okay, well, in that film of Michael Moore, it talked about people trying to unionize the people at the Walmarts in America, and they brought in, if somebody heard the word union or organized, there's a group that are union busters for Walmart, and they go in and stop that from happening. And the only country that allows Walmart allows unionization for is Germany. So
Dave?
I think when you talk about how much money someone gets for a given job in a different country, I think it's all relative because, if a lawyer in Iran makes $10,000 a year, then, as opposed to whatever a lawyer makes in the United States, I think that difference has to be taken into consideration. So if you talk about a clerk at a Walmart over there only makes 25 cents a day, that might be fair in relationship to what the other people in other industries or other jobs are earning in that same country.
And the cost of living.
Sure.
You have the cost of living to take into consideration, but then there are the oppressive conditions that keep them in such a low paying country and low living situation.
Well, what I was referring. Oh.
It's echoing.
Yeah, mine is.
Yeah,
Everyone's in.
Well, what I was going to say is that what I was referring to with NAFTA is that we went in and bought up all their land, and so then the small farmers who were already struggling wound up without land, and then they had to become, farm workers, much lower pay than what they had before.
Okay, while I was reading this, I don't think it's in there. I just want to bring up one more point, and then I'll turn it over to you, Eleanor. I was thinking, I heard a laugh, or I won't turn it over to you, whatever. I was thinking.
I've got some stuff here.
Okay, good. So I was thinking of Vietnam, and I was a teenager. I graduated from school the year before, or the year after the us getting out of that. And when I was just thinking now, or when I was thinking while I was reading, I was, this imperialization, what were we in Vietnam for? Because we lost. We lost big time. We lost tons of people. But that was to me, I think, maybe it was just my beginning of understanding about going into all these other countries all the time. Ted.
Having talked to some Vietnam vets with multiple tours, it appears to me our primary purpose in being in Vietnam was to protect the mission on rubber plantations. A French company of all things.
Oh.
Dave?
So our soldiers were forbidden sometimes to even fire into them, even though they were full of the Viet Cong.
Yeah, I thought it was all about communism.
Oh, everything's
Yeah.
supposed to be all about communism.
I think that
Dave?
was just what the government used against us.
And remember, they refused to call it a war. They called it the Vietnam conflict.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
That was the problem too.
Let's hear from Dave.
The very common comment was, we were there to stop the spread of communism.
Right.
And I was there. I know what it was about. And it was really silly. I could tell stories. We don't have time here to tell the stories. But the one time I got in a conversation with a Vietnamese guy who could actually speak a little English. And I asked him, I says, well, what are you going to do when America wins the war? How is this going to affect your life? And he looked at me, shrugged his shoulders kind of calmly and said, all I want is something to eat, a place for me to lay my head, and for people not to mess with me. That's all they cared about.
Yeah.
Okay, Eleanor. There you go.
Okay. I noted at the beginning of the chapter, well, I don't know if it was the beginning, but somewhere pretty close to the beginning, it talks about William James being part of what's known as the Anti-Imperialist League. And yeah, like you, we never hear of the US being imperialistic.
We always have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Carnegie was also a member of that league and it gained a lot of people. But what I wanted to point out is, as a religious studies person, William James is known as a psychologist who wrote the book Varieties of a Religious Experience. And in 1905, it's after all of these wars. That's considered one of the classic psychological books on what constitutes religious experiences. So that's just an aside because his name jumped out at me. But so the Spanish-American War, which included the Filipino Insurrection. I had my grandfather that went to the Philippines on that one. So I'm aware of that. In fact, the only picture we have of my grandfather is him in uniform during that Filipino insurrection. So anyway, so what was the purpose then? Why were we going to Cuba and the Philippines and Samoa, American Samoa and so forth? What was our point in doing all that? I'm throwing that out. Of course, we've kind of answered that. But one of the things that I wanted to point out, we still hold Guantanamo Bay and American Samoa. It's because the Navy needed coaling stations. That was
What kind of station?
coaling to get,
The ships all use coal for their fuel.
Oh, coal. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
COAL.
OAL.
Okay,
And
thanks.
what's ironic is for last 100 years, they haven't used coal, but we still hang on to all that territory. Simply because I guess we want to. They keep talking about closing Guantanamo, but I don't think it'll happen. You know, it gives us a foothold in Cuba. So, all right. So here's a question. It's interesting to me to see how often the press gets a hold of something that happens, usually some kind of naval disaster. The Maine, the Lusitania, the Gulf of Tonkin. And then the press gets a hold of that and uses it as a pretense to get a war started. Do you agree or disagree? I mean, I'd like to hear some discussion.
Well, and you know, a lot of the times there's no evidence, right? There's no hard evidence that, you know, someone was attacked. But what I really liked in this chapter is the response of, I can't remember whom, but there's a whole paragraph about how the Carnival of Carnage that takes place every day, month and year in the realm of industry, the thousands of useful lives that are annually sacrificed to the Moloch of greed, the blood tribute paid by labor to capitalism. Ultimately, the point being is that death comes in thousands of instances in mill and mine, claims the victims, and no popular uproar is heard. So it's like, you know, the press works up this uproar over, you know, like in the Mexican War, like several American soldiers being shot, even though again,
American blood.
right. But it's, I mean, I think to me that really stood out as such a great point. I mean, how many people were even killed by the police in America in all of those strikes, right? Like women and children burned and, you know, murdered. And there's no uproar, but then, you know, not to say that every life doesn't matter, but then, you know, we hear that, you know, several American soldiers die abroad and we're ready to start a war over it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, anyone else?
I think there's two important things. I think there's two important things at play. One is that media outlets thrive on sensationalism. That if there's conflict drives capitalism in news, and humans are driven to outsized vengeance. That's what the Code of Hammurabi was intended to limit. You know, so if you can associate our empire with this event that is not necessarily connected to us or a particular enemy we're supposed to be making, people will explode and make a war out of something, whether or not that was supposed to be happening. I mean, we have been thriving on wars that have been fueled by 9/11 for 19 years.
Ted?
Well, the part of the point on this one was that we are getting into wars that the press gets a hold of when it has no scientific basis for what it's screaming about. In the case of the Maine, they finally raised it. It was in the part of the Havana Harbor blocking traffic. So they finally got it out of there a few years ago and determined that the cause of the explosion was coal dust, inadequate cleaning aboard the ship itself. It had nothing to do with the Spanish. We did it to ourselves. In the case of the Lusitania, it was not the German torpedo, it was a secondary explosion of war goods, explosives bound for England, which was in the front hold of the ship that sunk it. In the case of the Gulf of Tonkin, it may not have actually happened. It's just the way the government reported the thing that set off the war scare. Again and again, incidents have happened, and we have not known the truth sometimes, in the case of the Maine, for close to 100 years of what actually happened. But what happened and what set off the war are two distinct things. And this is a problem with the press. It is a problem with our understanding of communication. And so often this, quote, military industrial complex tends to modify the facts so that the general public doesn't know what went on until generations later.
Okay, Katie, yeah. go
And,
ahead.
and
I know I've heard of yellow journalism and sensationalism, and I think that definitely occurs. Now it seems so as if the press, whatever that is, are seen as advocates for the truth, whatever that may be, or trying to find out what's really happening. But in certain parts of our country, the press is not believed and people are very skeptical. So I'm sure in the past, the press has made terrible mistakes. And I'm sure now there's parts of the press that make terrible mistakes. But in today's world, it seems like the press, whatever that is, and whoever makes up that group are really important because we don't know what's going on and we don't have a lot of information. That's all.
well, and there's a difference in the free press and the state-run press, and that's what we're having to fight against is this state-run reporting that is being pushed, and trying to differentiate between news and commentary is a whole nother ballgame too. That's why I listen to so many different sources so that I can kind of find the truth somewhere in there.
Do you watch the PBS news?
PBS, ABC, MSNBC, CNN. That's about it. CBS. That's about all I watch. Well,
Not fun.
online, not that's commentary, but online news sources as well. Ted?
Well, there's an excellent news of an afternoon on Channel 9, half an hour from Berlin and half an hour of BBC. And you combine that with the PBS and domestic, you start getting an interesting cross section of what's going on in the world.
That's true.
I just want to make this point, and actually it's been made by some of the people from abroad, like who visited us, is like how little there is on the American television about the world. And every time we hear about the world, it's about like, you know, something that has to do with problems. You know, it's this, it's almost like it's out there to prove how flawed the rest of the world is. And there's just like so little knowledge and interest in how people live, like regular people live, and kind of, and it's always presented from the angle of sort of comparison, or like the American land, like all those kind of out of the ordinary, unusual ways, as opposed to like, well, here's a different way to see the world. Here's a different way to live. And I think that's important because, and it also kind of factors into this, you know, aggressive international policy, because when you get to see that people are ultimately, they ultimately have the same concerns and they need the same things, and they're very similar, it's harder to wage wars. And I kind of see purpose, you know, this in a way, this is purposeful. And again, it goes back to like who owns the media. It's all the same people, the same capitalists, with the exception of, you know, some things like some channels like PBS, even though I want to say that the Koch brothers have gotten even on the board of their science programs, you know, so that we don't talk too much about, you know, climate crisis.
Ted?
When I was teaching citizenship in the world to the Boy Scouts, I was encouraging them to get access to international radio to broadcast, which we no longer have now. And that was, 30, 40 years ago. But I pointed out that if you hear the evening news from Radio Havana and before the end of apartheid, Radio Johannesburg, you would believe you were in two entirely different worlds. And the contrast was incredible. And being able to monitor and listen to the version of the news from other countries, like in our case, radio, the Berlin English broadcast, is a very enlightening experience. And as far as putting the positive forward, some of the science shows, nature and what have you, really show the way people are living and trying to preserve nature in the rest of the world. It's out there, just you have to dig it out.
Okay. Okay, here's another way to look at here. How has U.S. agriculture, United Fruit in Cuba and Central America and Dole pineapple in Hawaii, how have they influenced our foreign policy?
Well, you don't get a whole lot of Dole pineapple in Hawaii anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah. Again, I think we're back to the profit motive. And of course, the way, it looks is that we just wanted to have people to sell stuff to. The Philippine Insurrection, they wanted to get a foothold into the Orient where they could sell to Japan and China, so our surplus stuff, whether it's agricultural goods or other industrial goods. So it's always, I don't know how we can beat a dead horse any further. It seems like, that's what we're doing. That seems to be our motivation for almost all of the things we've gotten into is profit or developing markets or grabbing their natural resources. That was another. They commented in the Spanish-American War that they had millions of acres of virgin forest to get the logging industry in there. And of course, we didn't even help the actual insurgents in Cuba. We had the Spanish still ruling, rather than even having anything to do with the actual revolutionaries. So,
and there's, it's very ironic that the language that was proposed for debate on the Cuban Constitutional Convention about intervention for the preservation of Cuban independence, and yet, the U.S. interests captured, like the railroads and all kinds of resources, and there's no independence if you don't own your resources. It's very ironic because, and ultimately it reveals the motivation for the conflict, right? And the rebels were rejected completely and their interests were rejected completely. So it's just blatant, irony.
Yeah. All right, so what about the attitude of the U.S. to court-martial the soldiers? And this happened particularly in the Philippines. Court-martial the soldiers who were writing home and telling the truth. How do you feel about that? And this has been true. We knew even in Vietnam that we were not getting the whole truth. After the My Lai massacre, we were getting something that wasn't the truth. It seems like this is a good American tradition, don't tell the truth about what's really going on.
Well, there's the code of the military of being what happens here kind of stays here. I think you have that with the police department too, of the blue protecting the blue, and so you don't have a lot of folks stepping out of line and telling the truth outside of what is authorized to be shared. And that's why we're having such a problem with the call for defunding police today. Is what that really means, but then also it's surfaced a huge underlying issue in the police department of a code of protecting each other and keeping quiet.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Lori Rigler.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's a certain battle even going on today in politics too, between image and substance. A lot of what has been done so that we look good. You know, we look good. We produce a lot. We're a wealthy country, yada yada yada. But not the substance of how did we get there or at what cost. And I think we're seeing that in politics today as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, Lori. Lisa had to have
The end justifies the means.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Dave about how you felt when you were in Vietnam. Were you discouraged or afraid or whatnot to tell the truth of what you saw over there?
No, never.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I never felt anything like that. You know, when it came time for me to go, I just went and did my thing, and you know, that was I didn't get involved with the politics of it or anything, or should we be here or anything like that, and like that one conversation I had with that fellow was a rare occurrence actually, because you know it was just a matter of do my year and come home.
But he was at the Air Force Base too, not out in the forest with actual fighting going on.
Very true. I was in a very safe, secure area. I wasn't out in the bush, and I really didn't have any experience in combat or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, jumping back to the Spanish-American War, since that's what we're supposed to be talking about, I guess, here. How did the Spanish-American War lead to the building of the Panama Canal? Has any of you read McCullough's book, The Path Between the Seas? We happened to, because we were going on a Panama Canal cruise in January. And so, you know, it was an enlightening book. The French were the first ones to try to build a canal. And I'm trying to remember, it actually ended up becoming a fiasco for the French. They just they made some progress, but there was a lot of fraud going on, and the leader, and I can't think of his name, do you remember? The leader of the French. Anyway, they ended up just having to give it up. So Teddy Roosevelt stepped in, and our fight was about where to build it. What part of the isthmus between the continents should we build it? And that was a big fight in Congress and in the Senate. So, but anybody have any ideas? During the Spanish-American War, we were trying to get ships over to Cuba, and having to go clear around the
Cape Horn.
Cape Horn. And
I
that,
remember studying that too. And I toured the Panama Canal when I went over there when my brother was stationed there, and saw the documentary. It was abhorrent conditions that those people were forced to work in. And I think it was malaria, and so many of them died working just like slaves to build that thing.
it was horrible.
Yeah.
They had landslide after landslide. I thought, it was almost a hopeless situation.
Right.
Actually, pretty amazing that they finally actually got it done by 1914.
Well, and to see the channels that they have, the
Yeah.
gates where they can close them off and then drop them to the next level, move them and drop them because of the sea levels being different. It's a masterpiece in construction, but it cost a lot of lives.
It sure did. But the reason was that was thanks to the Spanish-American War and trying to get stuff to Cuba from the West Coast, not so much the East Coast, but that Roosevelt realized we need a canal, and he's the one who pushed for it, because of that. But yes, it cost thousands and thousands of lives and money. And it was quite a feat. So anyway, that's probably the one thing that came out of the Spanish-American War that we can say maybe was positive eventually.
Sort of, kind of.
It's also the fact that we developed methods of handling yellow fever. The malaria we still haven't gotten on top of, but they've discovered that the mosquito that's behind yellow fever tends to like human habitations. And by keeping that stuff properly drained and taken care of, they could bring the yellow fever epidemic under control, which is what had wiped out the French. And we learned that in Cuba after the war.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't have too many more questions here. I'd like to hear some discussion of more of ethics, though. Of what are we to do as citizens of the U.S. to stop this malarkey? That's it. That's the thing. I guess I feel kind of helpless about it. It seems like this has been our mode of operation all the way through. Even from the revolution, as we discovered, it's the rich conducting all this stuff. Eisenhower, of course, warned about the military-industrial complex. And the more we hear about Eisenhower, the more happier I am with him. He did a lot of good stuff for the country.
And was fighting an uphill battle in the process.
He was. And they say that his platform actually looks very much like the Democratic platform today. Equal pay for equal work and stuff, that just makes good sense. And, so this is how far the Republican Party has gone. And I don't want to get into politics, but
Katya has her hand up.
But
Well, this is depressing, but it's not. It's good to blame everything on the Republicans, but if you look at the votes for the military budget, even over the last 4 years, the absolute majority of Democrats have supported the military budget. There are very few renegade senators and representatives who actually voted against them. And it's not simple in terms of, there is always so much mixed into every bill, intentionally so. The bills are created so that they're so convoluted. And if you vote for this part, then you can be blamed that you voted against this good part. But ultimately, I think one of the things that we can do is hold the representatives and senators of our own party accountable for those votes in support of the military-industrial complex, because even if we look at the percentage of our taxes that goes to the military-industrial complex,
Yeah.
and as you know, Howard Zinn quotes politicians over and over who say that war is good for business, and be that what is called peaceful imperialism, which is still going on. I mean, it doesn't have to be always, you know, upfront war, but there's a lot of peaceful imperialism. It is supported by both parties, because
Yeah,
as it turns
you're right.
out, both parties are run by capitalists.
Yeah, you're right.
Ryan?
You're gonna have to jump in there.
It's not particularly popular because of the way our culture is structured, and it will require significant changes in that culture to do so. But I think in order to end this imperialism, we have to minimize income inequality, minimize wealth inequality. We have to reduce the power that's afforded to money, which means overturning Citizens United. It means, you know, providing resources for those who don't have them without all the red tape hurdles that welfare currently requires. For those of us with the resources, which means time and money, it means educating ourselves on how our products come to be available to us the way that they are, and demanding through our money that companies change their behaviors, not simply buying the cheapest thing, but understanding the human cost, the opportunity costs, the environmental costs of everything that we buy, and making a choice each time we're able to improve the world a little bit. It's not about being the best possible person, but being a little bit better than we were yesterday. We make our own incremental changes, and collectively we can make a world change. But as long as dollars speak, we have to use the dollars we have to speak.
Yeah.
And that includes encouraging our IRAs, our 401ks, our companies, and what they are invested in, and really calling them out on some of their businesses and entities that they need to divest from, and really pushing that. Ted?
And on the military industrial complex, we've had this controversy on some of the groups in Santa Fe in terms of the proposed pit production. And unfortunately, we're not being told the whole truth. I know that plutonium has a relatively long half-life. At what point do the pits produced 50 years ago start aging where they would no longer work? I don't know. This is classified information, but they're talking about turning out hundreds of more pits, which we apparently need like a hole in the head. We have probably 6,000 or 8,000 of them in the country right now. It only takes 2 to go bang. So they're talking about producing more materials which are highly poisonous, as well as being radioactive, when we have such a supply now that they're warehousing the dang things. It doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Of course, it gives jobs in Los Alamos, and particularly Savannah River plant there in South Carolina, which has sort of run out of things to do because it was primarily a site which produced plutonium and processed plutonium for nuclear weapons. I don't think plutonium has any purpose other than nuclear weapons, so that's what they did there.
Ryan?
All right, we're about out of time.
Can I, just one more. I was just reminded of some videos I've seen on different electoral practices, and we have been narrowed to a 2-party country by our first past the post election. Either it's a winner take all system, but there are other systems of voting that some jurisdictions are experimenting with, where it's ranked choice, right? So you pick the person you want the most, and if that person doesn't get all the votes, then all those ballots go to the second choice, so that it doesn't make it entirely unfeasible to vote your conscience, so that we have the opportunity to have more than two parties, which will then distribute the power more, which means that our voices mean more, and we won't just have the two versions of the capitalist parties that vote for the military-industrial complex every time.
Yeah. Most parties in Europe, there are more than two. There's 3 or 4 parties. Or more, yeah.
Well, George
so-
Washington warned about a two-party system. He said it was going to destroy this country. It'll divide it. And voila, here we are.
Yeah. The US has never functioned with a third party. It's just one of those things, it just never has.
Well, even you've got the libertarian, you have the independent,
Well,
you have those kind, but they just never get any kind of traction.
That's right.
Katya?
Well, but I think they don't get traction because, speaking of media, I mean, the whole system has been created so that, they can only be, for example, viewed on the debates only if they get, a certain percentage of the votes, or even to get on the ballot, you have to get a certain percentage on the votes. But then how do you get recognition if you don't get any media attention? So it's like this vicious circle all around to, prevent any kind of choice. We love to, I think Americans, and I've lived here long enough that I can say I'm part of the system too. I mean, we love to talk about choice, but there's actually very little choice. We don't get a lot of choice. We see the same two parties on the ballot, and that's about it. That's all we get.
Yeah.
The choice comes in our stand in front of a aisle in a grocery store. Isn't that pathetic? How many choices? You can hardly make a decision about anything because there's too many brands, too many choices, too many styles, too many everything. But then with the things that matter, we're forced into a controlled environment of what we should be choosing from, instead of eliminating the party system and having people on platforms and you just vote for the better of the candidate and give everybody equal media attention. But then that again dilutes the power of those who have it. And so they use their money and power to make sure that that never happens.
Yeah.
So they can keep it. Ted.
But when there has been a strong third or fourth position come forward, I take the upcome to the preparation in the 1850s to the Civil War. You take the populist movement, particularly among the farmers in the 1890s. There was a certain amount of this actually in the 1930s. One of the two major parties in every case has managed to co-opt enough of that position as so that it sounds like it's representing the same thing. This was most obvious in the Democratic takeover of the populist movement, but some of the maneuvering around Lincoln's election and some of the third party attempt, left attempt in the 30s, also one was taken by Republicans and one by the Democrats. But when there has been a third position put forward, one of the two major parties has tended to grab it and run with it. So this has been part of our history, keeping the two parties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we are at 5 after. So I want everybody to smile for the camera so we can get a picture. And then we're gonna bid you adieu until next week.
2 chapters next week.
2 chapters next week. We'll do 13 and 14, and the lecture's already done, and it'll be public on Wednesday. All right?
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Walk with
Good.
your hand in the hand of the Lord this week.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a good week, you